In 2014, a Kickstarter project promising an open-world, realistic medieval RPG was launched. The game would be set in a historically accurate location in the Czech Republic, feature real historical events and people from the past, and promise a challenging yet deep role-playing experience. The project was successfully funded, almost quadrupling its fundraising goal, and in 2018, after 7 years of development, Kingdom Come: Deliverance was finally released. For me, playing KCD for the first time was an experience similar to what others have described with Skyrim. The sense of awe and immersion was beyond explanation. I felt like a part of a living and breathing world whose limits I had yet to discover, and I loved every second of it. Well, when it worked. Upon release, Kingdom Come was riddled with bugs, from funny glitches to game-breaking issues. This, paired with some controversial design decisions, may have pushed off many people interested in the game. However, if you persevered past the issues, you would find a beautifully crafted living world with tons of freedom to explore and mess around in. After many patches, the game still isn't perfect. There are some, mostly harmless, bugs, and performance can still be an issue at times. But the game is now very playable. Aside from performance, KCD does have other issues, even when working correctly. Its adherence to realism, while one of the things that makes it special, can sometimes be a double-edged sword, lending to some questionable design decisions. Realism is often arbitrarily defined, leading to players having to consume potions or sleep in their bed to save, since manually saving is much less realistic than consuming a magical potion to do so. Another case of this is with bows. When aiming a bow, there is no reticle, since in real life you wouldn't have a magical dot appear in front of you to tell you where to shoot. Except, there always is a reticle when you're not using a bow, so it's fine otherwise, but when you're trying to hit something with an arrow, it suddenly isn't. This could have worked brilliantly had Warhorse come up with some alternative way to consistently predicting where the arrows would land. Instead, the bows still shoot from pretty much the center of the screen. Now you'll just have to approximate where the reticle would be instead of seeing it. Tough luck, I guess. KCD's combat system has also faced criticism over the years. Overall, it's a system I really enjoy, especially in one-on-one duels. When facing larger groups of enemies, however, problems arise. The auto lock-on is clunky and often unpredictable. This can be mitigated through good positioning, but it's still clear the combat wasn't designed for taking on multiple people at once. Add different heights in terrain into the equation, and the combat turns into a beautiful shitshow of people dancing around, swinging at air, and sometimes landing a strike. A defense I've often seen against this criticism is that in the real world you wouldn't realistically be able to fight against multiple enemies at once. In my mind, these are two separate issues. It is possible for a group fight to be very challenging without it needing to feel extremely clunky. Look at Dark Souls for instance. Facing a large group of enemies at once can be a death sentence, but it still avoids being nearly as clunky as Kingdom Come. And anyway, if you know how, choosing large groups of foes in KCD isn't that hard, and that's another issue. You often need to rely on cheesy tactics to survive, which often fights against the otherwise immersive experience. The game does share the sentiment of large fights being intentionally hard, as it itself endorses you to run away when outnumbered and facing impossible odds. The problem is that the automatic lock-on makes this one hell of a struggle. Oh, you're in combat, so now you can't jump unless sprinting, and now you're looking at a totally random enemy when you were facing the other way a second ago. Haha, try and run away, bitch. I dare you. Ideally, there would be a button called, I don't want to fucking fight, let me move normally, which, get this, would disable the auto lock-on and let you move like you otherwise would. This button does actually exist and is called pulling out.
What?
Your bow, I mean. This is a side effect of you having to be able to aim freely when using a bow, and the player has to pretty much figure this out themselves. Also, this leaves your defense open if you'd suddenly want to block an attacking foe, which you'd never want to do, right? In short, problems do definitely exist, but in my opinion, the overall immersive and unique experience far outweighs any of the negatives. Closely after the release of Kingdom Come, a group of articles criticizing the game were released, bringing into question, along with other issues, the game's lack of diversity. In fact, this criticism had been brought up even before the game's launch, with some people disappointed in the game's lack of people of color. The game's director and lead writer Daniel Vavra's defense against the criticism was the game's goal of realism, or in this case, historical accuracy. In a tweet made in 2015 addressing the question, Vavra stated that, "Would you please explain to me what's racist about telling the truth? There were no black people in medieval Bohemia. Period." Some have called this a bad excuse and cited cases of POC living in medieval Europe. I personally don't have the credentials necessary to accurately validate either claim, and thus will avoid voicing an opinion on the matter, just as every principled centrist should do. In all honesty, I don't think the lack of POC in KCD is necessarily due to malicious intent or racism. The matter may have simply not been given much thought before it was brought up, at which point Vavra saw the opportunity of fiercely defending the all-white cast and flaming whoever questioned it. Though there were instances of black people living in Europe during the time period the game is set in, it isn't entirely unfeasible that some places were entirely comprised of folk we would consider white these days. So, was Kingdom Come one of those areas, or would it have had a POC population? With KCD not being set in a bustling city like Prague, and there being no particular historical marks of black, brown or Asian people being present in the particular time and place where Kingdom Come takes place in, it would be very unlikely for there to have been POC present, according to an article by thefundamentals.com called Kingdom Come, Representation and Layers of Privilege. The article goes more in depth on this particular issue and highlights how the game could have been more diverse without sacrificing its goal of realism in the form of Romani people, who were a well-documented population in Bohemia around the time KCD took place. This is a sentiment I completely agree with and would like to see echoed by any future releases by Warhorse Studios. Either way, it is good to ask, what is the reason such questions have arisen about the game? Is it due to some outraged SJW crowd trying to push their socialist agenda, like some people would lead you to believe? GameRevolution.com would beg to differ. In an article called Kingdom Come, Wolfenstein 2 and the Myth of Keeping Politics Out of Video Games, they state, "The reality is that people question Kingdom Come's lack of people of color precisely because Vavra, a man whose support lies in circles that flirt with the far right, was behind the game. Vavra has, in the past, expressed his support for Gamergate while speaking out against, quote, censorship and a progressive bias in video games. Vavra's political leanings are clearly right-wing, with many of his Twitter likes being spread to prominent right-wing figures, including Charlie. MLK was a mixed bag. Kirk.
Activists who get in my way in London and stick signs up in my face trying to get me to join the gay Palestinian cause. I don't give a shit about Israel or Palestine. I care about white people. and not the sandy Jew yeah? I'll leave you with that. I really think that you should press the button to wipe Jews off the face of the earth. That's all.
Furthermore, Vavra has committed the sin of posting cringe. I don't claim that Vavra's political leanings and statements wouldn't be an understandable cause of concern, but for some reason, while playing, I never got the image that KCD was right-wing. How come? Maybe trying to keep politics out of video games had done its deed. Maybe my brain had just melted, or maybe the game even felt quite progressive at times. A sentiment I often hear is to separate the art from the artist, to enjoy the art of a reprehensible individual despite their views or actions being problematic. In my opinion, this is often not possible. No, this doesn't mean all art made by people you disagree with is bad, merely that one should be aware of the artist's intentions and views, to be wary of how those views may have bled into the artwork. In reality, pretty much everything is political, even the absence of politics. And Arthur will, even unconsciously, often put their views into their own work. This is why putting KCD into scrutiny due to its creator's views is fair. However, we must remember KCD isn't a single-man project. Yes, Vavra did have a large impact, but he didn't have complete control over it. According to an article by gamesindustry.biz, there were 6 other writers in the team, Vavra being responsible for only 10% of the total writing, the main story, not to mention all the other people who worked on the game. For this reason, I don't think the right approach while analysing the game is to focus on Vavra and his views, but to instead look at the game and how it presents its world, characters and themes. The game certainly does have many things to say, even political, and looking at them is the only true way of finding out what it represents. Before we go any further, it would be good to acknowledge the challenges that have been brought up during this project. Firstly, I am biased, just as anyone else, and those biases are certain to affect how I interpret the game and its messaging. That said, it is my intention not to ignore any information based on how I want to perceive the game. It has also come to my mind that my love for the game might soften some of the criticisms I have for it, but I believe that is something I am able to mitigate. By criticizing something you love, one purely wishes it could be even better and maybe improved in future iterations. Either way, none of these are major roadblocks. By far the bigger challenge is the way the game presents itself. Since one of the game's goals is to realistically represent the time period it is set in, it can be hard to differentiate when the game is saying how things should be instead of how things were. For instance, when a character is talking negatively about sex work and Henry is agreeing with them, is the game taking an anti-sex work stance, or is it purely trying to present how those things would have been viewed in the time period? I will avoid putting too much weight on ambiguous cases. By far the more interesting cases are the ones where the game seemingly goes against what norms we would believe to have existed at the time. When that happens, we can be quite certain the game is trying to take some stance on an issue. And with that out of the way, we can move on. In what is objectively the best mission in KCD, Henry is sent to a monastery on an undercover mission to find a criminal disguised as a monk. His suspects are the 4 recently arrived novices, Jodoc, Siskin, Lucas and Antonius. Each of them has their reasons for becoming a monk, but one of them, Lucas, seems to be hiding something.
I'm Gregor, a novice. I saw you at the ceremony.
I know. It was hard not to notice you.
And you are?
Lucas, also a novice. Don't get upset, but I don't want to talk to you. I'm happiest alone.
This raises your suspicions. Could this be the man you're looking for? Upon inquiry, you find out what's really going on.
I've heard that you, that you enjoy the company of men. Is there any truth to it?
What? How do you know that?
The cicadas told me.
They'll never leave me in peace. Yes, you can call me a sodomite, a sinner, a monster, the spawn of Satan, but tell me this, Gregor. Can I help the way I am? I tell you, it's a test of my faith, a test so daunting you can't even imagine it. I swear to God, I've never lain with another man. I've never sinned. When my father wanted me to find a wife and start a family, I told him the truth, and he had me sent here. And in a way, I was glad. My guilt had been consuming me, and I knew in the monastery I'd find peace. The Lord sees my soul, and He knows it's pure.
In an RPG fashion, the game offers you choices on how to respond.
You're right. I found it interesting, but I'm not judging you. You are the way you are. You should be true to yourself.
I'm glad you aren't like the others. Thank you for not passing judgment.
God didn't create you with such thoughts, brother. The devil's polluted your mind and led you astray.
I hoped you were different from the others, that you'd understand, have compassion. But I was wrong.
Maybe I am just biased, but to me, being sympathetic towards Lucas felt like the correct or good choice here, instead of calling him a sodomite and a sinner. You do lose reputation with Lucas if you decide on the wrong reaction, but that isn't much of a punishment unless you're an empath like me. But I feel like if the game was trying to go the Gamergate "keep politics out of my video games" route, Lucas' backstory would have been something left out. However, this isn't the only representation of homosexuality in the game. In fact, later on we learn that the main villain, Istvan Toth, and his right-hand man are having some sort of an affair.
I don't need to save myself. Istvan will save me. And he'll kill every last one of you.
Why should he save you? He'll sacrifice you just like everyone in Vranic and Pribyslavitz. You're nothing but a common bandit.
You don't know anything. He'll come for me, and anyone who lays a finger on me will pay dearly.
Now I'm curious. Why would he care that much about you? Could it be your lovers?
You'd never understand.
Upon discovery, this information is used against Toth in an attempt at trading hostages, however unsuccessfully.
Sir Istvan!
What is it? Did our neighbourly visit catch you unprepared?
A little, but we've settled in nicely. And this fellow is enjoying our company so much, we simply can't get rid of him. It seems we are in similar situations. Perhaps it's time to send our respective guests home.
Not a chance. Do you take me for a fucking fool? Be warned. If anything happens to Eric, I'll let every manjack here have his way with this bitch, and I'll dice Kobila into goulash meat.
This happens during a cutscene and the player has no input on how to react to it. Some of the main cast does, at least indirectly, make fun of the fact, but I find it being closer to "haha, we know your little secret," than as a direct implication of it being a bad thing. The fact that the game doesn't explicitly show its main cast as being against homosexuality, unless the player decides to do so, is certainly worth noting, as one would think attitudes towards the subject wouldn't have been very warm during the medieval period. In the instances homosexuality is talked negatively of, it is by the monastery circulators, who the game portrays as hypocrites, spending their nights drinking and playing die, breaking the monastery rules while simultaneously being in charge of them being upheld by everyone else. In 2015, migration to the European Union saw a large spike as a surge of asylum seekers from the Middle East, Asia and Africa started arriving in Europe. Over the course of the year, 1.3 million refugees sought asylum in the continent, the largest amount ever since the Second World War. This became known as the 2015 European migrant crisis. The crisis had many effects, notably the rising support of anti-immigration rhetoric among right-wing parties and tightened asylum laws in many countries, such as Germany. In the following years, the Great Replacement conspiracy theory gained popularity, and it wasn't too uncommon to hear refugees spoken about as Muslim invaders and a danger to Western society. Immigrant criminality was a heavily utilized talking point. Here in Finland we even got our own 1350 statistic. Despite only making up 8% of the population, immigrants are responsible for 30% of rapes. This has been used by some parties as a reason for opposing immigration. However, the data itself is inaccurate at describing who really is committing such crimes, as it consists only of suspected rapists. The majority of sexual violence is never reported, and according to statistics, most commonly the act is committed in a private setting by a person who the victim is familiar with. In these cases, the perpetrator is more likely to get away, thus leading to the conclusion that immigrants are very likely overrepresented in these statistics. But how does this all tie to Kingdom Come? In the game, Skalit's citizens are forced to seek refuge elsewhere after their hometown is raided by King Sigismund III. A majority of them end up in Ratai, whose lord, Sir Hanush of Lipa, takes them in with open arms. In the city, however, things don't end up too bright. A few of the refugees manage to get by carrying water to the town, cleaning out feces or holding small fistfights. For the most part though, they have to resort to begging for alms and sleeping near the town gates in small tents built for them. If that weren't unfortunate enough, most townsfolk view the refugees as a burden and often complain about the criminality apparently thriving among them.
How do the Ratai folk get on with the refugees?
I know they got nowhere to go. Skalitz is a pile of ashes and the countryside ain't safe, but they've been here too long. Some of those buggers got light fingers, and not a one of them appreciates the sacrifices we made for them.
Sound familiar? The real question is whether or not this is a coincidence. With the Skalitz plotline being very central to the game, it was most likely decided upon before the refugee crisis began. That said, it isn't hard to believe that there could have been inspiration taken from real-world events, as the game shown in the Kickstarter campaign 1 year earlier was a very different game to what we have now and still incomplete. And even if that weren't the case, the sympathetic view KCD paints of the refugees, with them living in poor conditions and the player having been witnessed circumstances that led them here, it would seem to me the game is overall supportive of immigration and refugees, even if applied to the modern world. This is the clearest instance I found linking the game to modern issues, but there are other interesting points to note as well. The criticism of hypocritical religious people is still something relevant today, especially regarding members of political parties who try to enforce their religious beliefs on other people while not even following those rules themselves. Another interesting point is a possible jab against anti-vaccine people. In one side quest, Henry is tasked to help some injured Skalitz refugees and workers. When receiving the quest, you can ask why the monastery isn't helping the sick, and this lends quite an interesting reaction.
How is everyone holding up? What can I do?
Holding up? People here are dying, usually needlessly, and I can't do anything about it. We don't have enough food or space or anyone who's willing to help us.
Doesn't anyone help you with nursing these people? You've got scholars all around you.
Scholars, maybe, but they leave the healing up to God. Nicodemus is trying, but everything he knows is from his books.
This is a group of highly educated people who, instead of using the knowledge they have acquired to help people in need, just pray and let God do his work. Though this isn't a perfect comparison to what most modern anti-vaxxers believe, I thought it was something interesting to note. In Deliverance, the player will meet two main types of enemies, bandits and Cumans. Bandits can range from poorly equipped peasants waving pitchforks around in the air to well-armoured knights sporting expensive weaponry. Cumans, on the other hand, are mercenaries the armies of Sigismund are comprised of. They are a historical group of Turkic origin who eventually settled around the western parts of the Eurasian steppe. Their armour is distinct from everyone else, and they speak in a foreign, eastern tongue. The game's story is set to motion when King Sigismund raids Skalitz, Henry's hometown, utilizing the Cuman army of his. Many of Henry's relatives and friends are killed during the invasion, and the town is burnt to the ground. From the beginning, Cumans are shown in a very negative light. In-game NPCs view them as raping and pillaging barbarians, subhuman even. Our protagonist, Henry, can be heard referring to them as those bloody Cumans. It doesn't seem like the smartest move to portray a whole group of foreigners purely as an evil invading force, and I've seen some people be uncomfortable with the way the game handles the subject. However, it would seem to me that this is another instance of the game telling how things were or would have been instead of making a moral judgment on the matter. Even in our modern times, we can witness atrocities such as rape being committed during times of war. Thus, it wouldn't be unrealistic for similar things to be committed by the Cumans.
Have you heard anything about the Cumans in Sigismund's army?
Everywhere they go, they pillage, rape, and slaughter. Or so the tales have it. Of course, all armies do that, but them barbarians take pleasure in it.
Furthermore, the views in-game characters hold of Cumans aren't supposed to be taken at face value, as can be seen in the quest Masquerade, where Henry is tasked to find pieces of Cuman armor to be used as disguise. Upon recovering the armor, people aren't impressed.
Oh. Is that it? It's a bit...
ordinary?
Are you serious? I got it straight from the fucking Cumans.
Oh, it's not exactly, terrifying, is it?
It's about as frightening as my aunt's speckled hen.
They just don't look much like a Cuman to me.
Upon inquiry what actual Cuman armor looks like, Henry is met with answers ranging from
fangs. They wear wolves' fangs to make themselves invisible in the dark.
To
they wear the skins of dogs hunted down in the night, so no weapon can hurt them.
What you just said is complete and utter bollocks from start to finish.
While not doing a perfect job, the game certainly tries to explain that the views of Cumans held by commoners is indeed false.
Snow doesn't do me any good, especially in summer.
Most of the things I've discussed so far have required some digging to get proper answers to, as most of the game's political messaging seems to happen in side quests or doesn't seem too explicit on the surface. There is, however, one issue which stands out on top of everything else and really paints a clear picture that this is not just some conservative game for right-wingers. Kingdom Come Deliverance is explicitly supportive of women's rights. During development, one of the many requested features was to have a woman as a playable character. Since the main story was designed behind a male character, just replacing the lead wouldn't have worked with what the studio was going for. However, they were open to the idea, as in the Kickstarter project, one of the funding tiers promised a quest line where you could play as a woman. The funding goal was reached and in 2019 fulfilled as the A Woman's Lot DLC. A Woman's Lot is divided into two separate quest lines, both of which take a look at women's status in medieval Europe. In the first half, you get to replay through the beginning events of the game, this time through the perspective of Theresa, daughter of Skalit's local miller. The quest line takes you through Theresa's journey of loss and tragedy, while painting a picture of her being caring, helpful, and incredibly brave. Theresa isn't afraid to put others' lives above her own, as can be witnessed at the final moments of her side of the DLC, in a scene we already witnessed in the beginning of the game, as Theresa saves Henry's poor ass from certain death.
I told you how it would end. You should have listened to me. This is nice work. The chief is going to like it. It's new, isn't it? And now, for the maiden bloodletting. Surely your father never would have imagined it would be your blood.
Right, you whoresons. I've had just about enough of you.
Hey, goat fuckers! The games are over.
George! Disperse this rabble!
The storyline also criticizes the way women were treated as property, as Theresa's father tries to marry her off to a wealthy individual in town against her will.
What is it, Pa? Why did you buy me that dress?
Look, Teresa, you're old enough to be married. It's about time we did something about it.
You're right, I suppose. But I don't have any suitors.
Actually, you do. I know of someone.
You found a husband for me? Who is it?
Don't worry. He's a decent man, a nice man. He's even close to the nobility. And he's rich. He'll take care of you.
Are you going to tell me who it is?
It's Chief Engineer Tobias.
Tobias Vavra?
Aye, that's right.
Are you pulling my... What are you thinking of, Father? Vavra has one foot in the grave.
Oh, come now.
Why didn't you ask me? You couldn't simply let me know what you were planning?
Teresa, listen.
It's all, Teresa do this, Teresa go and cook, Teresa clean up. And now, for good measure, Teresa go and marry an old fossil. Does nobody care what I want?
Good God, I never thought you'd make such a fuss about it. It's the way things are done. We can talk it over, but the decision is mine to make. You've got to think of your future, Teresa. Master Vavra is a respected man, and that respect will extend to his wife and children too.
Children?
For heaven's sake, lass, don't be so naive. You were born a girl, and raising a family is what God made you for. Unless you'd prefer the convent. Go to the tavern this evening and let Master Vavra spend a nice pile of groschen on you. You'll have a great time, you'll see.
Show me that dress, then.
Unfortunately, outside of A Woman's Lot and the beginning of the game, Theresa isn't utilized to her full potential. Yes, there is a romance available with her, but when that's complete, there isn't really much to do with her, other than have her repair your clothes for free and take her out on an occasional walk, which starts playing the same old cutscene when you've done it too many times.
Here we are. Thanks for stopping by, Henry.
My pleasure.
She really is one of my favorite characters in the game, and I hope a possible sequel will feature her in a more central role. The second part of A Woman's Lot follows Johanka as she starts receiving visions of the Virgin Mary.
I keep having peculiar dreams and waking up.
What do you mean? Peculiar dreams?
The same one, over and over. In it, the Virgin Mary appears to me.
Johanka starts preaching to townsfolk about her dreams and gains a lot of attention, mostly positive, but some negative.
While you were gone, some thugs came here and kicked around the gifts that people brought. Then they vanished before the guards got here.
Oh? Who were they?
I didn't see them at it, but there's some fellas hanging around now by the entrance to the monastery. Maybe that's them?
Enough! Please! I give up, you hit!
Welcome to Hutol Press Channel.
I already ran into those thugs, and they won't be giving you any more trouble. That I promise you.
Oh, really?
Many people come to Johanka for advice. In one instance, a wife asks Johanka to talk some sense into her reckless husband, who keeps playing his money away in dice games. Johanka doesn't want to remain the center of attention, as her goal is only to help people, but some still don't take a woman preaching too kindly and try to stop her by any means necessary, even sending in thugs to disturb the sermons. Eventually, Johanka catches the attention of the Catholic Church, and an inquisitor is sent to sort things out. Johanka is taken in custody and put onto trial for hearsay. For heresy. At this point, it's a matter of life and death. If the player has made the right choices so far and manages to get enough people to testify positively of Johanka, she will walk free, however, unable to preach anymore.
And since you left Ledechko, have you sinned with anyone?
Well, it was only the one time, monsieur.
And with whom did you sin?
With Henry.
Well. So Henry leads loose women to the path of righteousness, only to drag them back into sin again.
And recently, a few troublemakers were killed near the monastery gate.
Murder? Such things don't happen without cause.
But it's true. They met outside town too, and it came to a bit of a skirmish. And that went too far. There were people killed.
That's deplorable. Violence in broad daylight, neighbor against neighbor.
Instead, if the player fails, Johanka will either die from torture or be taken away to act out penance for her sins. Johanka's story acts as a criticism both of how women were treated at the time, meant to stay quiet in the sidelines and let men do the speaking, and also of the Catholic Church's action against people with heretical views at the time. Criticisms against the Catholic Church aren't exclusive to this questline either, as the same points are brought up in another side quest, where the Church is hunting a family with Waldensian beliefs. Either way, it's clear the developers had a lot to say regarding women's rights, and this DLC was a great output for those things. In addition, it's generally regarded as the best of KCD's DLC, with the most content and best written storylines. There's also an interesting detail I found while playing one day. There actually exists a medieval abortion potion in the game which can't be accessed normally, but with cheat codes you can spawn it into your inventory. I tried drinking it and unfortunately it didn't have any effect. But this raises many interesting questions. What is it there for? It certainly isn't functional now, but was it meant to be? Was it maybe for a cut quest, or just a dev messing around? Unfortunately, I don't have the answers, but it's fun enough to speculate. There is a lot more one could talk about, especially regarding the game's relationship with religion. The game is filled with religious references, culture and people, as pretty much every person you meet is a Christian and greets you with something along the lines of "May the Lord watch over you" or "Jesus Christ be praised," which has become a large meme among us, the game's fanbase. However, from the multiple criticisms mounted at religious organizations and fanatics to a quest where you drink yourself into oblivion with a priest, only to end up rolling in a barn with some local ladies, it's quite clear the game doesn't hold religion in any holy status. Religion is in the game because it was important at the time, and that's exactly how it's depicted. While Kingdom Come may not be trying to be overtly political, it certainly has a lot to say. Even disregarding the things we've talked about, the main story is surrounded by politics of its time, with struggles for the throne, religious reformism, and nobles trying to further their own goals. There still seems to be something missing though. While the game goes a long way trying to immerse you in its world, I would have loved to see a closer look at how the feudal system, for instance, affected commoners' lives, maybe in a future game then? If you think I missed anything or interpreted something wrong, you can go write about it in the comment section. And if you got this far, a big thank you for watching the video, which took quite a while to put together. Finally, I'd like to tell you to go play KCD right now, if you're able to put up with a thin layer of jank. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. This is Akuspel signing out. Bye.